Hello and welcome to today's webinar on French-Canadian resources at NEHGS. My name is Ginevra Morse, the Director of Education and Online Programs at the New England Historic Genealogical Society. I'll be moderating today's event. NEHGS is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer this webinar today for our members and friends around the world. Giving today's presentation is Rhonda McClure, genealogist at NEHGS. Rhonda is a nationally recognized professional family historian and lecturer specializing in New England and celebrity research, as well as computer genealogy. She's been at the Society for close to 9 years and helps patrons and members at our research library and archives here in Boston. Her areas of expertise include immigration and naturalization, late 19th and early 20th century urban research, New England, Midwest, Southern, German, Italian, Scottish, Irish, French-Canadian, and New Brunswick research. It's a mouthful. Today, Rhonda will be discussing search strategies, resources, and records available for French-Canadian and Quebec research, with a special emphasis on what's available here at our library in Boston. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question in the panel to the right of your screen. We'll address those after the presentation. And we do not have a handout for today's presentation, but you can find a very informative subject guide on our website that covers the resources mentioned here and more. You can find that under Education and then Learning Resources. You will also find a camera icon on the upper right of your screen that can be used to capture screenshots of the slides to then save to your computer. We're also recording this event, so don't feel that you need to take pages and pages of notes because you will be able to review a recording of the presentation starting tomorrow. All right, so without further ado, I will turn things over to Rhonda.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We are going to talk about the items predominantly that we have here at our repository in Boston. So if there's something that you're familiar with that I don't mention, it's probably because we don't physically have the records or resources available here. So let's first talk about the best search strategies. What records should you hit first, and what's going to give you the best and most information? Generally speaking, my rule of thumb whenever it comes to the search strategies is to start with the church records first. These are going to give you the most information that the original records. It would be like getting a vital record in most other states or countries, and gives us that definite information. So I will use those. I often will also turn to some genealogy books that we'll talk about to give me the sort of the big picture. But I don't just stick with those genealogies. I'm obviously going to take the information that's there and I'm going to dig into the regular records. The next thing is the census, because they will give us the family dynamic, especially as we get further into the 1800s. And then we're going to talk about notarial records. These are something that are basically all of your court records rolled into one. And so they're very important when it comes to the French-Canadian research. So let's first talk about church records. Unlike most other types of research that we do, when it comes to the French-Canadian research, especially in Quebec, the church records are our vital record resource, predominantly because the province of Quebec did not start keeping the recording of civil registration, birth, marriages, and deaths until 1994. So that means that we only have the church records. They are one of the best resources when you're working in any time of Quebec's history, because they were created pretty much at the time that a parish or town was founded. They are available in two forms. There are the church registers themselves, which we will deal with in great detail today. And then there are copies, also known as duplicate, second, or civil copies. And in fact, if you were to write away to request a civil record from Quebec prior to 1994, what they're going to do is they're going to send you a copy of that church record. So many of the parish registers of all of the denominations, are part of what's known as the Drouin collection. And this is a valuable resource that allows us to have access to these parish registers from the 1600s into the 1900s. In the most recent time period, like the last couple of years, the Drouin collection has been made available on Ancestry. But I find that generally speaking, I do a much better job of manipulating the images from the original microfilm. So if I find a family on Ancestry and it's really kind of tough to read, I will often pull the box of film for that parish and put it onto one of our microfilm scanners just to get a better view. Many of the films that were digitized have a speckling on them that makes some of the images that are on Ancestry kind of hard to read. It's nothing they could do about it. I mean, there's massive numbers of images. So sometimes it just becomes necessary to turn your attention to those microfilms and get a better copy of just the part of the record that you need. So let's talk a little about the denominations that you're most likely to find and when they started to be created. Obviously, being New France, one of the predominant religions and the earliest is the Roman Catholic Church. The earliest registers are those for Notre Dame de Quebec, which was founded in 1621. So this is pretty much your earliest records when it comes to New France. The Church of England, the Anglican records begin about 1766. This is, of course, because they have now taken over control of Quebec. It's no longer New France. Presbyterian records begin in 1770 in the city of Quebec and in 1779 in the city of Montreal. So when you're working with the fiche/film versions of the church records, if you are working with Catholic families, usually step one is to search the Catholic marriage indexes, of which there are 2 on microfiche. Now you may be saying to yourself, well, why would I do that if everything's on Ancestry? Basically because, as you're going to see as we look at these indexes, it can give you a lot of information. So this one is the Drouin index that is broken down, and they have 2 versions of the fiche. One is by the husband and one is by the wife. And for each entry you will get the name of the husband and then the name of the wife on the one line, followed by whatever the parish is where it took place. Below that and indented, you will find the names of the parents of both the husband and the wife. And then you will also find the date of the event. One of the things that this allows you to do is to kind of work with the indexes to get parishes, to perhaps, especially with the surnames, to maybe see a sense of a pattern of migration as they move from one parish to the other. And then once you've gotten all of the marriages out, then you can go to the specific parishes that you need and work within the baptismal and burial registers to get all the complete picture for the families. One of the things that I do want to call your attention to is down towards the very, very bottom of this. We have one here where we don't actually have the name of parents. What we have are that they're marrying, but they are a widow and widower, and so you get the name of the earlier spouse. This is because in the original record, that's how they're going to be listed. And so what you need is you need to go back and find that original marriage to find the parents' names. But as you can see, a lot of the information is in this particular index, making it very easy to get a lot of marriages and parishes and timelines built very quickly just from these indexes, which can be a lot easier than trying to work with individual records through Ancestry search. The second index that's available is the Loisel index, and of course you can see here it's a little bit different in the arrangement, where you have the male or female up at the top. In this case, this happens to be the female, with their parents to the right, and then below that is the spouse that they're marrying and his or her parents. You have the the date that the marriage is taking place, and then somewhere you'll also see the parish. And you can see from the two examples that we have here that it could be slightly different in how the arrangement is. Keep in mind, though, that these are just for the Catholic marriages. So if you know that your family was not Catholic, they were one of the Protestant faiths that was up there, then Ancestry is going to kind of be your go-to if you don't know an exact parish. So once you've got parishes, then we here like to turn to the microfilm. And again, as I said, one of the things, maybe because I'm old school, maybe because of the way in which searching on Ancestry and some of the commonality of the French-Canadian names, sometimes you get a lot of hits and you're not quite sure who's who, and you may have to go through a lot of them. Whereas if I can turn to the microfilms, I can just kind of go through each one and look at them and be able to put together my families quickly. Keep in mind that the records may be written in French or English depending on the locality and denomination, and I've even seen some of them written in Latin as well. If they're in French, the abbreviations in the margins, because they identify the records as like Baptism 1 or Marriage 22, are going to be a B, an M, and an S. So the B is the abbreviation for the French word for baptism, marriage obviously is for marriage, and then the S is for burial, which in there, at that time they were using sepulchre as the term, which basically means to the grave. So when you're working in these, as you will see as we go in and explain how to work in Drouin, you'll see that in the indexes they identify them not by a page number usually, but by a event number. So there's usually an index at the back of each year's volume. And as you can see along the sides here, we've got those abbreviations I was just talking about. So we know that we've got some baptisms, then we've got a burial here, then we've got a marriage. And the marriages may or may not have both parties listed. So in this particular example, you can see that they are both listed because you can see the spacing and that it says and. I've seen just a single name as well, whoever the husband is, so keep that in mind. As to whether or not you're dealing with page numbers or event numbers, usually if it's done in the manner you see here where the abbreviation is separate from the number, it's usually a page number, but just about the time that I think that that's, true, it goes and changes. However, you can see down here where we have Lalonde, this one and the one directly below it both have page 20, and you can fit multiple items on a page. So this would indicate to me that they are using a page number status because you can't have two baptism number 20s. So those are a couple of the idiosyncrasies that you sometimes have to keep in mind. Once you've looked in the indexes, then you can go to the actual record themselves. And we have an example of a really nice one here that is for the burial of Isidore Marchand. And what you can see is that obviously it is written in French, and that you're going to see that down towards about halfway through, we see that his wife predeceased him. So you may get, if it's the parent, you may get a child, you may get the parents. If it's an older person who's married, you may get the spouse living or deceased. You never quite know what you're going to get. You often will get an age as well. In this case, we have here, the age is listed. If you are not really fluent in French, don't panic. The first thing is the more you use these records, the more familiar they'll become, and just the layout will become easier to you. But there's also on Family Search a wonderful word guide that you can download. It's a PDF that gives you the more common names, the French versions for all the months and numbers and things like that. So you'll be able to quickly pick that up and read that information. And as I said, it will take you some time, but eventually you will get to the point where you understand how these are arranged. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that you'll see a lot of other names here. And that often is the result of, especially in a baptism or I'm sorry, in a burial or in a marriage, it could be the witnesses. In the baptism, it is often the names of the godparents or the sponsors, depending on which religion we're talking about. So there's a lot of names, and what you'll want to do is just pay close attention to them, because some of them are going to be parents, some of them are going to be sponsors, some of them are going to be relatives of some sort, and sometimes they may just be the person who says, yes, I can attest this guy's really dead. That's a very common thing, especially in Europe, so for me it was not a huge thing to find when I was working in these records. Also, if you're working in the microfilms, or you're going page by page on Ancestry, which is another way to use the Drouin collection if you're not able to come into our society, is instead of doing a search, find the parish that you're most interested in and go page by page. But one of the things that you can do is there's a little cheat on the left hand of the microfilm that will tell you the year and the parish that you're in, because there's often on the films multiple parishes for different years, and so that could be a little disconcerting if you're not yet comfortable with the French language. Obviously, these records are my go-to. I feel that whenever I'm working the French-Canadian records, I'm going to hit these church records first, even if it takes me a little while to figure out what parish I need to get into. And that's because they give me so much valuable family information. And these are the original parish records. So it's not like somebody's transcribed them and there's an error. I've got as much, and as close to the original as I'm going to be able to get. But there are some compiled genealogies that can make researching your French Canadians a little bit easier, especially if you're just getting into this aspect of your research. Like any type of new research in our family history, it can feel a little overwhelming. It's almost like we've gone back to all the basics again, where we don't remember, where we no longer remember how to do the research. And it's predominantly because of the variation in the language. That's the big stumble here. So if you can find a published genealogy, then obviously you're going to want to go to that first. There are two published genealogies and one other resource that I often recommend when it comes to locating a family, getting a handle on how they interacted with others, or what the names are that you're going to find that are most common. And that happens to be the three that you see here listed. Tanguay, which we will talk about in detail, and then there's the French-Canadian 1600 to 1900, an alphabetized directory of the people, places, and vital dates. This is actually 3 of a 12-volume set where a company took Canada as a whole, kind of broke it up into regions, and the French Canadians got 3 volumes, so each region got 3 volumes. And this has an alphabetical list that does not lead you to things like Tanguay and Jeté or the Drouin collection, but leads you to things like census records, city directories, any type of thing that you may not have realized was out there. So it can lead you to some records that you weren't familiar with. But obviously the 2 compiled genealogies are where you're going to want to probably spend your time. So we'll take a look at both of those, the first one being Tanguay, which is in 3 volumes, and again, it is going to be in French, so keep that in mind. And you may or may not be able to find it at a local library that you have access to, but we do have it here. So let's take a look at an example of a family entry as it appears in the record, in the book. And you will notice that there is some generational information, and usually it will tell you something about the primary information, so the name of the person, and then the children, who he marries, etc. So we're going to blow this up so that you can really take a peek at it and talk about what we're looking at here. So here we have PRDH, who was born in 1672. Again, we're using abbreviations and we are in French, so keep that in mind because this S right here means that he was buried 9 February 1737. Over to the right, you will see that we have a reference, a cross-reference. In other words, Pierre Dion is the son of Pierre I. Okay, and then in the below that is the name of his wife, Genevieve. So Pierre Dion II, who was born in 1672, marries Genevieve Fetteau, and the date of their marriage is actually what you see up here at the top, with the bolded year, and then the place. And there are some footnotes so that you can tell where some of this information is coming from. Below that, you will see that there are some names listed in italics. These are their children. And we will have their birth, their burial, and their marriage, if known, and who they married. So for Pierre, we know that he was born in 1706. He was buried 22 September 1745. That Joseph, his brother, was born 8 August 1707. He married 17 April 1730 to Madeleine de Lassard in Quebec. So there's a lot of information packed into these little tiny compilations. The kicker is that these are compilations. These are, have been done and they are relied on heavily. But again, if I can go back to the original records, I'm going to do that. It's just me. It's old school. I don't know what it is, but I don't trust most published genealogies, regardless of when they've been done. Even these, I'm going to try and go back to the original records, especially since I have them in the drawers right on our floor. The other dictionary that is another compilation of families is known as Jeté. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody actually pronounce the full title. We all just call them Tanguay and Jeté. And if you were to come into the library to the 4th floor, we would know exactly what you were talking about. This one goes up to 1730, so that's where they're going to cut off as far as the families that are included. That's why it's a smaller volume. And again, it's going to have a similar feel and look to what we were just looking at with Tanguay. As the example we have here shows, we have Antoine Deal, and it's written a little bit differently, as you can see. So we have his information here. Right off the bat, they don't know his origins, but he died on the 24th. He was buried on the 25th of December, 1721. And I want to call your attention to the way they're doing the dates here, because here in the States, we're very familiar with using the month and then the day and then the year. In many other countries, the day comes first, and then the month, and then the year. And fortunately, in this example, it's sort of like what I call the impossible date, if it were American style, in that there are not 25 months. So it's an easy one to figure out. But if you were working with one that didn't have that, it may take you by surprise when all of a sudden you find records where they're not matching with what you thought they were. So it does tell us quite a bit. It also tells us that he is the brother of Jean, and it gives us ages according to various records. The REC means the recensement, which is censuses that we will talk about in a little bit. And the early ones are the 1666, 1667, and 1681 censuses. So it's giving us his ages in these particular censuses, allowing us to see, that it's definitely him as he's progressing. Below that, we have the marriage information and where it took place, and then we have his wife with addition, much the same information as we had for the husband, with the exception of the fact that in this case, we know that her father's name is Jacob. And then the children are arranged in a more traditional manner to what we're used to seeing, as well as giving us the, information about where they're dying and things. It also is telling us certain things about the parishes and the locality where they're living, because that becomes very, very important to us when we're working in these records. And again, keep in mind, they're using an N in this case for a birth, which is, you know, another French way. So this is the birth, not the baptism. So there are some abbreviations that may throw you when you first look at them, but try not to get too thrown by them. As I said, these are great resources for getting a handle on your family tree, but I like to go back to the original records and see if I can pick up the families. And one of the great resources that's now available that kind of can coincide with this and allow me to get quickly to perhaps those early census records, which are hard to read, is something known as the PRDH. The PRDH is an abbreviation or an acronym for Programme de Recherche en Démographie Historique. It's a program where they were reconstructing the population of Quebec from the early beginnings in the 1600s. And ideally, they tried to take them up to 1849. The website that I'm about to show you that we have access to from here, we have a subscription to it, basically says that it's a digital collection of the church records of ancient Quebec. And it is predominantly those vital records that we will find from 1621 up to 1849. And what they've done is they've abstracted that information and then they've tried to combine the families based on what the records are telling them. This is another way in which you could do some good research before you start delving into the original Drouin church records. And the PRDH is, as I said, it is a website, and they do cater to a public access to the database. We have a subscriber as an institution. We have additional information. So if you go in as a public, as just an individual for free, there's a certain amount of information that you will see. But as a subscriber, we have additional information, and they do cater to personal subscriptions. But if you're, living in the area, why not come to NEHGS? Because in addition to helping you to use this, we'll also have people who can read the French language if you're struggling with that as well. And so once you get into the PRDH and you look at the search fields, one of the things that may throw you when you get to the search fields is that they use the word name right here. And what they're talking about predominantly here is your surname. And sometimes that can throw you because when we think of name, we think of given name or we think of both names. And so what you want to do is you want to put in the surname and then the first name. And then I usually start very, very broad when it comes to that, predominantly because unless it's a really, really common name, the odds are that the hits are not going to be insurmountable. And if they are, then I can go back and I can narrow things down. One of the new things that they've started to do, though, is when it comes to the surname in question, they are giving you what are called nicknames, because many of the French Canadians had what are referred to as deep names, and that just means it was a nickname. It was a way of differentiating families of the same surname, much like we would call somebody, John the Red versus John the Tall or John the Lumberman. That's what it means, but because these names can be the combination of two family names, it's often important to know what those nicknames are. So I was really happy to see that the PRDH had added that as another item to see, because it gives us additional surnames to keep in mind as we're working in this particular program, but also in our research as we're going forward, especially if these families ultimately come down into the States, because one of them may take the Geoffrion name, one of them may take the Saint-Jean name. And so if you know that that's a possibility, it just makes your research all the easier. So after you've done that and you do the search, you'll get a list of items. And that list looks a little like what you see before you. And at the very top, you'll see that we have the 1667 census. And how do I know that? Because the type says R. Remember, they're very big on abbreviations. Recensement is census. And so this Pierre Jaffreon is the subject. So he is the person who is mentioned in the record. It's his record, as opposed to him being related in some other fashion. Because as you look at the list, you'll see subject, father. Usually those are your two main ones for the men. You might see subject or mother for the others, possibly wife, depending on the record in question. We are actually going to take a look at a baptism here that took place in 1672, and we have Pierre Jaffreon, who is the father. And so when we click on the date of 1672, April 27th, we will get a new screen that gives us additional information. And the first thing, so every line is numbered, and that's how they are working this. And so the first thing is the main individual, so the subject of the record in question. Below that, we have additional names, and their relationship is based on somebody else, usually on the record. And so in this case, we see for line number 2, here's the father and spouse of number 3, and Marie Priot is the mother and spouse of number 2. And so you can kind of get a sense of how some of these people are related, their genders, what their involvement is in the record itself, etc. And then we have here, some of the other names that are mentioned in the record, keeping in mind that with a baptismal record, in addition to the child and the children, you're going to have the godparents, and there may be a godmother who's not married to the godfather, so you may have an additional spouse. And there are oftentimes residents mentioned within the record. Clicking on Marie Jaffreon will take us to sort of her personal card, which is everything that the PRDH program has been able to compile about this particular female person. So Marie Jaffreon, her parents are Pierre and Marie, when she was born, when she was baptized, her death, her burial, any marriages she had, when and where those took place, who she married, and so forth and so on. And all of these items can then be looked at in certain records, with the exception of her first marriage, where we do not have apparently the record in question. So if it gives you a place, the odds are that there is a church record that you can turn to and go forward in looking at the family. So if Marie was your ancestor and you wanted all the children of her marriages, then you would be able to use the information and work it based on this and go into those original records and play around. Or you could do a search on her or her husband and see where she shows up as mother, as one of the options in the search fields. And that would also allow you to see some of the children. Once I've done the church records, especially if I am kind of getting frustrated or I'm getting forward into the years where I'm getting into a time frame when the censuses may give me some information or may help me in identifying exactly where somebody is, especially if I'm dealing with a Protestant family and therefore I'm out of PRDH perhaps, or they're not coming up in that, and I can't do a search in some of the indexes, I may turn, I'm going to turn to the census to get additional information. The censuses in Canada are quite extensive, and they vary depending on the time frame, the period, who was in charge, as to what you're likely to find. And they may be found in many different places. We here at NEHGS have all of these censuses, but they are also available online in different places, such as Ancestry, etc. So starting with the provincial period, there are provincial and Canadian national census records. Provincial is things like the early time frame, especially those 1600 ones for the New France time frame that we were talking about earlier. There's only the 3 of them, and they're just for what they call New France. Then you have what's known as the head of household, much like we have here in the U.S. from 1792 to 1842, where it gives just the head of the household, and everybody else is kind of under other listings if they're included at all. From 71 to 1911, you have what are known as the Canadian national censuses, with 21 actually now being available. Again, these are going to be for all of Canada, but they are broken out by provinces. The 1825, 31, and 42 Quebec head of households are the southern areas are enumerated as part of Lower Canada. And so these other names for this French-Canadian area have to be kept in mind, especially if you've got an immigrant who comes over, say, in the mid-1800s, and he says he's asked where he's born. He may tell you he was born in Lower Canada or Canada East. That tells you what part of Canada he's actually from. And so those terms are something that you will find as you go forward in your research, both here and in researching in Canada. As we saw in the PRDH, there are very early censuses, and here we have one from the 1667, and it's as good as some of the later censuses that we will work with, including having ages and having additional information and possible relationships, especially if somebody is a servant in a household. So don't be afraid of these resources. And the 1666, 67, and 81 are actually available online. And I don't believe we have put a link to them in the study guide. I do need to update that because I did just find that recently. But it's not searchable. You can't type in a name and magically get something. But if you have access to PRDH, then you can go and look in and see which part of that census you need to concentrate on. Moving forward, you can see that in the 1851 census, we have the heads of household and then the people who are in the household. And we're actually going to blow this up so that you can get a sense of what might be in the page. So we have the family here of, let's see, where do you go? Here's David Renault. And David and his wife Phoebe have some children, and it gives us the occupation. Okay, so he's a day laborer. But one of the things that this particular enumerator did, and this is sort of like when we find that enumerator here in the States who didn't listen to what he was supposed to record, and instead of just putting like Quebec or New York, he recorded the town where they were born or something. Same thing happened in this situation where this particular enumerator put the parish where they were born, because that's what this column is asking, is what, where were you born? And then way over on the right, we see their ages here. So we have that information, okay? And we've got, actually, I take that back. David is the child in this case. It's actually all the way up here, Francois and Lucie, who are the parents. David's the one that I was researching at the time that I found this record. And you can see here that the parents are from a different parish. So this is another way in which you can track those parishes backwards. By far, though, when it comes to working with your French Canadians, and if you really want to get everything that is possible, and especially if you're dealing with some of these really early arrivals, part of the the King's Daughter time frame where the earliest of people are coming over, then you're going to find yourself turning to the notarial records. And notarial records are kind of any kind of court record that existed. As such, it could be anything from a, you know, what we would consider to be things that we would go to the county courthouse for, and then some things that we would never even have thought there would be paper on. So outside of those parish records, these are probably the most useful because they give you the most information as far as the parties involved and the why it's being created, and we'll look at that in a second as we talk about the different types of records, but let's talk about how they're used. These are not easy to use. The notarial records are not indexed by the names of the parties in that you can go into some big massive database right now. There is something called parchement that is available in Quebec at very certain places, but it's not available to most of us. So we have to do it the old school way. And that way is to find out who our notary was and then to turn to the notary's records and see if he had an index to his records. And they're often referred to as repertoires. And so before we get into the step-by-step of that, let's talk about the different types of records that you're likely to find in the notarial records, because sometimes people get surprised by what they see. One of the ones I think that most often surprises families is the marriage contracts. We think in terms of, oh, you know, they're all going to marry, they're going to stay married forever. Well, these people took a much more sensible approach, and they often have what are known as marriage contracts. This talks about who's bringing what to the marriage, you know, is the wife's father supposed to supply a cow, whatever it is, and then who's taking what should something happen to the marriage. So the marriage contracts can be very useful. Then they have wills, which we would normally go to a courthouse for. And then they have the inventories of the deceased person's estate, the distributions to the heirs of an estate, and all of these would be separate items. We think in terms of a packet, like a probate packet, where all of this would be kind of lumped together. That's not necessarily the case here. It's going to be whoever the notary is at the time, it's going to be under him and it's going to be his stuff. The guardianship records. They have something also called donation entre vifs, which is what they refer to as an early will. And an early will is kind of something that we see here more predominantly in a land record, where dad says to the son, I'm going to give you the land for, you know, $1, but in return you have to take care of me until I die. That's an early will. So in other words, there are stipulations put in this document that whoever is going to get the, you know, whether it's land, a cow, whatever it is, has to abide by and do certain things up until that person dies, and then they inherit the property. Anytime there was a labor contract, you may find that there is paper on that as well. In addition to these, we also have the land records that we would expect to find, and those are, you know, traditional. Again, these are a lot of the things that we're used to going to a county courthouse and just being able to look at everything, whether it be probate or land, whereas in this case we have to do it kind of by notary, and as the notaries may change over time, you may find that you have to look at different notaries. Many of these records will be in French because your notaries were French. The good news is that there is a booklet called Cushing's Notarial Form Book that can give you the general wording of the various types of records that the notaries would write out. What this can do is help you to understand where you should expect to find names, dates, occupations, anything that would be sort of a fill-in-the-blank kind of a thing. These are legal documents, so there's a lot of legalese in them. As such, there's a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily need to know that much about, and if you're not fluent in French, could be overwhelming to you. So knowing where to expect to find the bride's name, the bride's father's name, etc., can be very useful. We do have a link to this particular volume. We have a copy of it here, but we also have a link in the catalog to an electronic version of this book. Some of the repertoires have been scanned. They're available on Ancestry. A few are available also now on Family Search. So let's talk about working with these records, because as I said, unless you have access to Parchement, which very few of us do, especially those of us in the States, you have to do it kind of in the steps that we're looking at here. So you have to identify the notary responsible for the location and time in question. Then you have to locate the repertoire, the index. And then finally, you get to the records for the notary. And step 2 of the index, there may not always be an index to his records. So you may have to just go to the notary's records and hope based on the time frame that you can kind of get them, because they will be predominantly chronological in nature. There's a volume here at NEHGS that has an index to all of the notaries and where they served and when they served, and in some instances it gives us information about their collection of records and where they may be located. And so I've put in a copy or an example of one of the pages from this so you can get a sense of the information found in them. So the first thing is the district or the village in which the notary served. And then the next item is going to be the years in which they served, etc. And in the center is where you're going to find the notary. So when working with this particular volume, the first thing is to go to the place and then look at the particular notaries. And they tend to be relatively chronologically arranged. The column that you see to the right of the notary is basically the box code, the film and box code from the National Archives of Quebec. And many of these volumes on microfilm we have here. And we have a couple of items that help to know whether or not we have a specific notaries collection here on microfilm. And then if we don't, then we can help you in finding where they may be, either through Family Search or if you are going to actually have to reach out to the archives up in Quebec to get access to them. I keep hoping more and more that as these become digitized that we'll have better access to them. And then you'll have the district over here. And in some cases the district may prove important because there may have taken, especially if it was a very big city, there may be one notary who dealt with this district over here and this one dealt with another district. Or you may be able to use the district to narrow down two places that are of a similar name and those types of things. So as I said, once you have identified your notary, then you're going to look and see if there's an index to his records. And here you'll see a sample of one of those types of indexes, and in 1762 he was handling a number of items here where he's got an inventory and a marriage contract, different things, and who it is that we're doing, like the marriage is between so-and-so and Joseph and Marie, and the date in which the event was taking place. This is as close to getting easily to the item in question. Once you get this far, then you do have to do the hard work, because you're going to have to get into the records and kind of figure out where 1762 starts and then where the January records are and work your way into them, because again, they're chronological. It's like any other court record book. It's predominantly chronological. And so after you've worked in an index or repertoire, if it exists, then you're going to go to the actual notarial record itself, which may or may not be easy to read, as you can see here in our example. Every notary has a different style of writing. Some of them are going to be in English, most of them are going to be in French, so just keep that in mind. And it may take you some time. You may have to truly manipulate a particular record, especially if you're here. We've got the scanners, the microfilm scanners, so you might be able to eliminate some of the dark paging behind it and make it a little easier. this is not something that you can dash in at 4:30 on a day we close at 5 and accomplish quickly. This is something that takes a great deal of patience. As I mentioned, we do have a link in our catalog to the book that gives you the examples for the types of forms. And here you'll see that we do have an example of the marriage contract before witnesses. And what you'll see here is that they're giving you, like, the indenture is made between the two parties, where they're from, etc. And so all that you need to care about is what's the part that matters. You know, where are the names likely to be, you know, holy bonds of matrimony, where are things going to be, and these marriage contracts can be elaborate. They can be multi-paged. Everything is spelled out. Every cow, every dollar, every piece of land. It is all spelled out, so don't be surprised to see that they go on for 2, 3, or 4 pages. Sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I've got it all, and then we find out, no, you really didn't, because it continues on, especially if you're not familiar with the French language. So always look to see if you can find where there's like signatures and an end to the item in question. Land and property is probably the last thing that I go to, but it may be one of the things that you find that you have to go to first, depending on when your ancestor arrived. And if they were there very, very, very early, they're probably going to be involved in what are known as the seigneurial records. This is not something we're going to talk about today because we don't have these records here at NEHGS. But understand that they were the very early records, so when the French king was granting land, he granted it to the seigneurs who were required to meet certain things. Sort of think in terms of a homestead, where he had to bring people over, he had to grow his community. Then you have the land grants and the crown land records. So when the Brits take over in 1763, especially the eastern townships, you've got petitions for land, you've got crown land records. There are also land records for the lower Canada. And again, there's that term that we saw earlier. When it comes to the crown land records, they are obviously British records that begin in 1763, and they're the eastern townships, the counties along the Ottawa River. Couple of places that are most important for those of us who are researching in the Quebec area would be the Argenteuil and Gatineau counties. These are French counties, but they end up where you may find that you've got loyalists or British subjects who are now intermarrying with the French who were already there. The areas are divided into townships or cantons, and then the land itself was divided into ranges, or what were known as concessions, which were then divided into regularly shaped lots of 100 to 200 acres. So there's a large breakdown from the biggest to the smallest, and all of that depends on who owned what. But you will often see in references to people coming into the country, into Quebec areas in the early time frame, or into, if you're looking at histories of various areas of Quebec as well as Ontario, you may discover that they mention things about the seigneurial, Argenteuil Seigneurie. This is a holdover from that seigneurial time frame. And basically, if you're seeing certain counties mentioned that you recognize as places where your ancestors lived, then you're going to want to pay attention to those particular areas and read up on them. And a lot of those books have been digitized, and you can probably find through doing searches on Google Books. Be creative with your searches and then just go in and specify that you want Google Books, and you'll be surprised what you see. To give you an idea of kind of what the map would look like, we have here a section of Dorline, and you'll notice that the land is very skinny and long. And this was done by design because as they divided up the land, everybody had access to the water. And so that allowed everybody to have irrigation for their their crops. None of this, oh, Farmer John gets mad and shuts off the little tributary that you're trying to rely on that goes through his land. Everybody had equal access to the land. So at first glance, everybody is like, oh, this looks a little strange. And let me call attention up here to La Sainte-Famille, which was an area that we saw mentioned when we were looking at the Jeté book. So understanding how some of these things work out can help you. As I mentioned, there is the Lower Canada Land Petitions. And the good news is that while we have the microfilms here of those records, which is great, finding our people can sometimes be a little tricky. And so the Library and Archives Canada has this great site, and they've begun to digitize the records, the actual land records themselves. But again, sometimes I prefer to look at the films, and the reason that I like the films is because it forces me to get familiar with the records. When we're using online searches such as this, it sometimes can be such a situation where we're taken directly to a particular page and we don't bother to read the whole page. Whereas if we're working in a microfilm equivalent, it forces us to look at the pages before and after. So as you are looking at this, you'll see that there is a search database, and you can type in a name and then it will give you a list of people that fit your search criteria. And then it'll tell you what microfilm box it is. So if you wish to come in and use the microfilms, you can do this part at home and then come in and we can help you find things on the actual microfilms, because the box numbers, while we have Library of Congress call numbers here, we've maintained the Canadian archive call numbers as well. So we can transpose that for you. And then what you get is what you'll see here, an example of one of the land petitions. And as you can see here, the township of Arundel, which is in Quebec, has a number of loyalists who were from Massachusetts. And so this is one of the early ones after the end of the war. When it comes to the Crown land records, most important is the petitions for the land, the patent certificates. They may include some very pertinent information that can help you with your research. The petitioner, the family, parentage, military service, etc. This has been a lot of information that we have just sort of thrown at you, and if you're new to family history research, try not to be overwhelmed by the language barrier or all of the records we talked about. Yes, there are some stumbling blocks here in arrangement and things, but if you're coming into our repository, myself and others can help you work with these records and get you to where you need to be and where you need to spend the bulk of your time. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, we do have a finding aid online for the French-Canadian genealogy that includes many of the things I talked about today, but also includes links to other items that are out there, and I will make sure that we go in and add those early censuses if you're dealing with that 1600 time frame and some of the other things. But all of what we talked about, you'll find information and guidance here, as well as books that you may want to pick up just because we have them here, but you may want to have them for yourself at home. So don't feel like if you miss something that you're lost forever. This will, as you read through this again, some of what we talked about will come back.
All right, thank you, Rhonda, for your presentation. So before we move on to your questions, I do just want to let you know that about a very special heritage tour to Quebec happening next summer. The tour will trace the path of captives taken from the New England frontier and brought up to Canada in the 17th and 18th centuries. And the tour will be led by Donald Friery, an experienced tour leader, historian, and the former executive director of Historic Deerfield. So whether you're a descendant of captives or want to learn firsthand about Native American culture and New England history, or if you simply wish to enjoy the magnificent scenery of the St. Lawrence Valley in lovely July weather, it should be an unforgettable journey. And also, if you register by February 15th, you will receive an additional discount. And you can learn more about that tour and other tours coming up at our website, americanancestors.org/education. All right, so now let's get to your questions, and I should say several have come in already. So let's get to it. Carolyn asks, are the Drouin indexes available online?
So the indexes, in the terms in which I showed you, the Loisel and the Drouin marriage indexes, are not online in that format. What you can do is go to Ancestry and do some searches. So you could do a search on the husband and wife in a marriage and play around. One of the things that I have found, like most of the records on Ancestry, is that you often have to be a little creative in spelling. Keep in mind that there's a lot of phonetical spelling that goes into these records. And if you've got a francophone who's recording an Anglo name, it could be completely mangled. I've had that happen, and vice versa. So you have to keep broad. The other thing is that many of your Catholics have like 4 names, 4 given names, and you may just know one of them, but in fact when he gets baptized he's got 4 given names, so you sometimes have to play around with that. But they are searchable, but if you don't find your person, you may have to just kind of, get tough and go page by page.
All right, we have a question from Rita, who asks, do you have an idea or a sense as to the time lapse between the actual birth date and the baptism date? Is there any kind of general time lapse that you can allude to?
There's no absolutes in this, in that the different denominations have different rules. Now, in most instances, it's going to take place, I would say, usually within a couple of months, but a lot depends on whether or not they had an established church where the baby was born, or if they're waiting for, the traveling priest or pastor to come through and take care of the baptism. And that's something that you have to kind of look at your area, see if there was a church that existed at the time, and if not, understand that your record is maybe going to be recorded somewhere else. But usually, and especially with the Catholics, unless it's an adult baptism where it's a convert or something, it's not like today where they're baptizing them as soon as they're born. There is some lapse in there, but I can't say that I've seen any that were beyond like 3-4 months, unless it was an extenuating circumstance.
All right. Now, Mary Beth asks, do you have any advice on researching Irish Catholics in French Canadian records?
Yes and no. The first thing is to keep in mind that your Irish Catholics will be in the Catholic records, so that's a benefit because the Catholic records are good. But because we are talking about an Anglo surname, it can very often be completely mangled. I mean, there's many ways in which we already can mess up something like, Macaulay. Now try putting that into somebody whose language is completely different, and you're going to have to be very creative. And this is sort of where I sometimes like the idea of being able to just go into the parish and go page by page in a time frame where I have a guesstimate of where the marriage took place or whatever. And that is possible on Ancestry and on the films here at the Society, where if you know the parish or the area, we can narrow down to a particular church or resource that's going to be best, and then maybe if you just go page by year.
All right. Now, Peg asks, what years were the provincial censuses taken?
The provincial censuses, if you're looking for like every 2 years, that's not going to be the case in this situation. Obviously, the really, really early ones, the earliest ones are the ones that I talked about, the 1666, 1667, and the 1681. And then you may find that there's an occasional one, but if you're looking, 1792 is like where they start to get consistent. You might find a smattering here and there, but usually going into the church records, you're not going to find like censuses as we know them in the 1800s, back in the 1700s.
All right. Now, Jill asks, would adoption records be found in the notarial records, possibly as part of the guardianship section?
If it were a situation where it was like a legal, adoption, it's very possible. If we're talking about an illegitimate child and maybe who the parent is, you may find that you're out of luck, because in the Catholic, just the religion itself, there's a great deal of protection for the the parents who weren't married, and so the baby may be just like a foundling who then gets turned over to a couple. So a lot depends on what you're hoping to find in an adoption record. If it's the case of where the dad and the mom die, then yes, somebody may become a guardian, or there may be a formal adoption. Like I said, if it's a legal type of document, the notaries handled it.
All right, maybe just a few more questions. Now, Jennifer asks, would Anglo-Protestants appear in Quebec notarial records?
Yes, the notaries were responsible, just like here in the States where you have to go to the courthouse to, file a probate or, file a deed to sell land or whatever. Everybody in Quebec, that's how they handle that. That was the way in which it was handled. So it doesn't matter whether they were Catholic or Protestant in this instance. The biggest thing is, what language are you likely to find the records in? But they're all handled by the notaries regardless of religion. It's the legal system that's in that particular area.
And kind of a similar question, Charles asks, would the records we discussed today be good for locating Canadian Huguenots?
Yes, certainly. Obviously it's not going to be a off with your head kind of a situation like back in France. If you get a Huguenot who comes to Canada, he's certainly going to be able to practice his faith. He may not necessarily be identified as a Huguenot as we know them in other areas, but he may show up in Protestant records.
All right, now Dennis asks, what census might name whether or not they had a Native American background?
When you get into the mid-1800s going forward, they do have a column that asks for your origins. Those would be the ones that you're possibly going to find the Native American. The church records are going to be much more open about that, especially the Catholic records. If you've got a convert who was Native American, they're going to spell it right out because they're blunt like that. But if you're looking at censuses, by the 1800s, it gets a little tougher because you just have such an intermixing, unless it's some of like the Micmacs or something. But it should be in the column that asks for origins.
Now, Mary Beth had another question about, when you hire an NEHGS researcher to look through the Drouin collection, would they be translating the French into English? And I can answer that with confidence. And that is, yes, they would translate those records to English for you in the report. Maybe one last question, and this comes from, let's see if I can find one. There are a lot of questions. Gail asks, could you kind of talk about what present-day areas are included in early Canadian Quebec and or Lower Canada? So what areas are we talking about when we say Lower Canada, and do we have maps at NEHGS that could shed light on that?
We may have some maps. I'll be honest, I haven't paid a lot of attention to the maps. I'm really bad about that when it comes to what we have here as a collection, and for that I apologize. But it's when we were talking about Lower Canada, and I'm trying to flip to that here so that I can give you an exact area, there was like a specific section that was considered Lower Canada. But if you were to Google that, you would be able to find an identification of just what it is. And what we can do is I will make sure, we'll take some notes and we'll add to the finding aid that we have out there so that we can take you to specific links to maybe images or maps that would be useful in working in these areas. But generally speaking, if you see the term Lower Canada, it does pretend it has to do with the southern areas of Quebec. And that same southern area then in 1851 and 1861 is known as Canada East. So that would be the easiest way to do it, but I'm a big proponent of Google. Google tells me everything, just because there's so many images that are out there and so many resources.
All right, thank you. I know that there were a number of questions that we weren't able to get to, but if you'd like more hands-on help with your research, or if you have more detailed questions about the projects that you're working on, you may want to consider scheduling a consultation with one of our experts, including Rhonda, or even hiring our research services team. Also, if you are a member of NEHGS and you have more or less quick reference questions, there is a service called Ask a Genealogist, which is a benefit of membership, and it's just Ask a Genealogist at nehgs.org, so you can send your questions there as well. And I'll also include all of this information in my follow-up email to you tomorrow. So thank you again for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org/education. I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.